This is the Daily Brief, one landmark court decision explained in plain English every day. Presented by FindCourtCases.com, this is your daily briefing on the law that shapes American life.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're doing a deep dive into a case that really, it rewired the whole system of money, speech, and power in American elections.
We're talking about Citizens United v. Federal Election Commission.
And if you follow political news at all today, super PACs, record-breaking spending, all those ads.
All of it. It all points right back to this 2010 decision. It's become the core dividing line in the entire debate about money in politics.
So to get the stakes, just imagine this for a second. Imagine you run a nonprofit, and you've just spent a ton of money making a documentary about a major presidential candidate.
And let's use the real example here because it matters. The film was called Hillary, the movie. It was about then Senator Hillary Clinton. And it was, let's be clear, very critical. It urged people not to vote for her.
Right. So you've got your movie, and you want to put it on video on demand right before the primaries. You want to run TV ads for it.
Classic political speech.
Except you hit a wall. A huge one. A federal law says you could face criminal and civil penalties just for showing it. Why? Because your organization, Citizens United, took some corporate money.
Even though most of its funding came from individuals.
So what was actually at risk here? I mean, at its core, this case was about whether the government could fundamentally limit political speech.
The speech of organized groups, corporations, unions, just because of who they are. The big question was, can the government ban speech based purely on the identity of the speaker?
And the outcome was, well, historic.
It was. Citizens United won. The Supreme Court said corporate political speech gets full First Amendment protection.
And the government lost that power to just issue a blanket ban on that kind of spending?
And that's why we still feel this today. So if you walk away with just one sentence, let it be this one.
The main takeaway.
The court ruled that political spending by corporations and unions is a form of protected speech under the First Amendment, but only when it's done independently of a candidate.
And the disclosure rules, the transparency stuff.
That all remains valid. That's the trade-off.
Okay, so that's our mission today, to figure out how they got there and why it's so important. Let's start with the world before this case, before 2010.
So before this, the landscape was governed by something called the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act. You probably know it as BCRA.
McCain-Feingold, right.
Exactly. And BCRA was this big attempt to regulate campaign finance. It was really targeting what they called soft money and this flood of corporate and union cash right before an election.
And it did that by restricting something called electioneering communications. Let's define that, because that term is everything here.
It is. So an electioneering communication was basically any broadcast, cable, or satellite ad that mentioned a federal candidate.
By name.
By name, yeah. And aired within 30 days of a primary or 60 days of a general election, and was paid for by a corporation or a union from their general bank account.
So the whole point was to stop those last-minute ad blitzes funded by big organizations.
Right. If you were, say, a corporation, you couldn't just use your main treasury funds for those attack ads. You had to set up a separate organization, a political action committee, a PAC, and that came with its own set of rules and limitations.
So back to Citizens United. They make Hillary, the movie. They want to run ads for it and put it on demand right inside that 30-day primary window.
And because the film was so clearly negative, so obviously aimed at a candidate, they knew they were walking right into the crosshairs of BCRA. They were terrified of these huge penalties.
So they sued first. They asked a court for an injunction saying the law was unconstitutional as it was being applied to them, to their movie.
They basically said, look, this is a documentary, it's political commentary, this is core political speech.
But the lower court didn't buy it.
Nope. The district court sided with the FEC, the Federal Election Commission. They upheld the restrictions. They said, you're a corporation, the movie's electioneering, the law applies.
And that set the stage for this massive constitutional showdown at the Supreme Court.
It really did.
Yeah.
Because it raises this fundamental question. When the government restricts who can speak because of their corporate identity, because of their wealth, how does that actually affect public debate?
And so the Supreme Court steps in, the final decider. Justice Kennedy writes the majority opinion, and it's a bombshell. He says the ban on corporate independent spending is unconstitutional.
Not just for the movie, but as a general rule.
The new rule becomes corporate political speech has First Amendment protection. You cannot suppress it just because the speaker is a corporation.
The court saw it as a blanket ban on speech by an entire class of speakers. They felt that the identity of the speaker, whether it's you, me, a small nonprofit, or a huge multinational company, it shouldn't matter when it comes to protected political speech.
Okay, but let's get into the really critical distinction they made, because this is the heart of all modern campaign finance law.
This is the legal core of it, yeah.
Oh.
The court drew this really sharp line between two different kinds of money in politics.
Right.
On one side, you have direct contributions. This is money you give directly to a candidate's campaign.
Writing a check to the Smith for Senate campaign.
Exactly. And the court has always said that can and should be restricted. The reason is the risk of what they call quid pro quo corruption.
Quid pro quo, this for that.
A direct exchange.
Precisely. The idea that if you give a politician $1 million, there's a serious risk, or at least the appearance of a risk, that you expect something specific in return. A favor, a contract, a vote.
Okay, so that's direct contributions. What's the other side?
The other side is independent expenditures. This is money spent advocating for or against a candidate, like running an ad for the Hillary movie. But, and this is the critical part, it's done without any coordination with the candidate or their campaign.
Wait a minute. So if the government's goal is to prevent the appearance of corruption, how is a $10 million ad blitz that helps a candidate not seen as creating that appearance?
That was the heart of the government's argument. But the court's majority had a different view.
Which was? Their reasoning was that an independent ad doesn't put any money into the candidate's pocket. It's just adding a voice to the public square, to the marketplace of ideas.
Even if that voice is funded by a billion-dollar company.
Yes. They said that things like ingratiation and access, getting a meeting because you're a big supporter, that doesn't rise to the level of quid pro quo corruption needed to justify banning speech.
So, to the court, an ad you run on your own is just speech. It's not a bribe. And protecting that open marketplace of ideas was more important than the government's interest in limiting who gets to speak.
To reach that conclusion, they had to do something pretty dramatic. They had to overrule one of their own major precedents.
This is where it gets really, really interesting and very controversial. To get to this ruling, they had to effectively tear down a case from 1990 called Austin v. Michigan Chamber of Commerce.
Austin was the foundation for all these restrictions in BCRA. And that case was built on an idea called the anti-distortion rationale.
Okay, let's unpack that. Anti-distortion. What was the argument there?
The argument in Austin was that the government had a compelling reason to prevent the, quote, distorting effects of huge corporate wealth in politics.
So the idea was that corporations are so wealthy, they have these special legal advantages.
And their spending could just drown out the voices of average citizens. It could distort the whole democratic process, even if there wasn't a direct bribe happening.
So the Austin court essentially said, we have to limit corporate speech because their wallets are just too big and they'll hijack the conversation. That sounds like a pretty compelling argument for political equality. Why did the Citizens United Court reject it?
Well, the majority found that rationale to be completely at odds with the First Amendment. They argued that the idea that the government can suppress one speaker to enhance the voice of others is censorship.
So the government's job isn't to be a referee for whose voice gets heard the loudest.
Exactly. The majority's view is essentially, the answer to speech you don't like isn't less speech, it's more speech. And the First Amendment protects all speakers, rich or poor. To start picking and choosing based on wealth or identity, that's a dangerous road.
So they were worried about a chilling effect.
It's a substantial chilling effect. They said the old system forced speakers to worry constantly about enforcement, which leads to self-censorship.
Yeah.
And they also said the ban in BCRA wasn't narrowly tailored. Meaning if your only goal is to stop quid pro quo corruption, a total ban on all independent spending by all corporations and unions is just way too broad. It's like using a sledgehammer to crack a nut.
And this is why the case is still so divisive, because reasonable people can look at the same facts and come to completely opposite conclusions.
Absolutely. The majority saw it as protecting fundamental free speech. The dissent, led by Justice Stevens, saw it as opening the floodgates for corporate money to dominate and distort our democracy.
So the blanket ban on spending is gone. But what rules are left? Did the court just get rid of all the regulations?
No, not at all. And this is the other crucial half of the ruling. While they struck down the ban on spending, the court explicitly upheld the disclaimer and disclosure requirements.
So the part of the law that says you have to put paid for by at the end of the ad.
That and the requirements to report who your donors are to the FEC, that all stayed.
Why? I mean, if you're so focused on protecting speech, Couldn't forcing people to disclose their support also have a chilling effect? Especially for controversial causes.
It could, but the court saw a different, more important government interest at play here. Transparency.
Ah, the trade-off.
Right. These disclosure rules don't put a ceiling on your spending. You can spend as much as you want. They just require you to tell the public who you are. The goal is to give the electorate information about the sources of political messaging.
So it's about accountability. You, the voter, can see an ad and know if it's being paid for by an oil company or an environmental group, and you can judge the message accordingly.
It lets you make a more informed decision. The court saw disclosure as a less restrictive, constitutionally sound way to maintain the integrity of the process as opposed to an outright ban.
Okay, so let's bring it all back home. The legacy of Hillary, the movie, the big takeaway. Corporate and union independent spending is protected speech, but you have to disclose it.
And the impact was immediate and massive. This decision is what paved the way for super PACs.
Explain that connection.
Well, a super PAC is basically a committee that only makes independent expenditures. Since that spending is now constitutionally protected, they can raise unlimited sums of money from corporations, unions, and individuals to fund those ads. It made elections much, much more expensive.
And what about dark money? We hear that term all the time now.
That's the other side of the coin. The ruling also, indirectly, led to a rise in spending by certain types of nonprofits, like 501c4, that don't have to disclose their donors. So they get the benefit of the spending freedom from Citizens United, but they can sidestep the transparency part the court seemed to value so much.
So at the end of the day, the movie case affirmed that the First Amendment protects political speech, no matter if the speaker is a person or a corporation.
Yes, arguing that this protection is just indispensable for a democracy to function.
But it leaves us with this huge, unresolved tension, a central question that we're still grappling with in every single election cycle.
And it's this. If the First Amendment guarantees everyone the right to speak, including massive corporations with bottomless pockets, how do we make sure that the voices of average citizens aren't just completely drowned out by the sheer volume of that spending? That question, that balance between maximizing speech and minimizing undue influence, is what makes this ruling still echo so powerfully today.
You've been listening to The Daily Brief, one landmark court decision explained in plain English every day. Presented by FindCourtCases.com, this is your daily briefing on the law that shapes American life. Thanks for listening. We'll be back tomorrow with the next case.